the supplementary video for Chapter 10, Organizational Change and Leadership Processes of Organizational Communication. Lots of good stuff in this chapter, so make sure you know what's expected for you to understand. Change is the one constant in organizational life. That's because organizations really are living systems that interact with their external environments and adapt to changing circumstances, or else they die out. Just like a sailboat actually makes several course corrections to keep going in the same direction, so too do organizations engage in constant change and adaptation, even if it looks like they are persisting relatively unchanged over time. The University of Colorado, for example, has persisted through time with a relatively stable identity, but that is only because of the countless little changes that have happened over several decades. So if you're going to be part of any organization in any capacity, you have to understand the nature of organizational change and how to function within the context of changing circumstances. A lot of organizational change is related to the concept of organizational life cycles. Lots of changes happen as organizations move through fairly normal life cycles, from startup and growth phases to maturity and even decline. Organizational change can also be planned or unplanned. Planned change is very common, as organizations make various strategic decisions to adapt to their environments and be more effective. Unplanned organizational change usually involves responding to some sort of crisis that was unexpected. That is, change is forced upon an organization rather than from a strategic decision. But we're going to focus mainly on planned organizational change in this chapter. For example, here at the University of Colorado, the College of Media, Communication, and Information, which this class is a part of, was the result of a planned organizational change to create a new college for media communication and information teaching and research. Some departments in this college were new, whereas our Department of Communication already existed and was moved from the College of Arts and Sciences. For years, we had lots of meetings about what the new college would look like and how things would work. And now a lot of the big changes are behind us, but we're still trying to figure out all the new committees and rules and procedures to be a fully functioning college in the university. And many of these are different from how a lot of us who have been here for a while are used to working. And although we did successfully create a new college, and things are going pretty well, you can imagine that an organizational change of this scale certainly has its complications. This chart in our textbook summarizes many of the common problems with planned organizational change initiatives, several of which we experience with the development of CMCI. So, how does communication fit into all this? As you might expect, communication is absolutely central to planned organizational change. For change initiatives to be successful, people have to know what's going on, why changes are being made, and what is expected of them. This involves constant communication throughout the change process. Our textbook summarizes research on communication and organizational change, explaining which strategies are more effective and which are ineffective. Next, let's turn to the concept of organizational leadership. Leadership is one of the most prevalent, even mythical topics in all of organizational studies. Everywhere you look, you see people focusing on the importance of leadership and developing leaders. Countless books have been written on the topic of leadership, and movies celebrate the heroic leaders in our culture. There is a lot to be said about the topic of leadership, way more than we can cover here in our introductory organizational communication class. I teach a whole separate class on organizational leadership. You can even get a leadership studies minor here at CU. This class even counts as an elective towards that minor. But there are several things we need to know about leadership and the history of leadership research as we develop our introductory understanding of organizational communication. 4 key models have shaped our thinking about leadership over the past 100 years or so. First, early thinking that leaders were born, not made, led to the development of trait theories of leadership, which focus on the characteristics of individual leaders. Look at people in successful leadership positions, see what qualities and characteristics they have, then find other people with those same qualities and characteristics, and you'll find more effective leaders. And leaders often do have similar characteristics, like verbal ability and self-confidence. But as critics of trait theories rightfully point out, this was at a time when leadership positions were limited to a certain type of person, namely white males. So it became a circular argument. Only white males were in leadership positions, so it should be no surprise that the traits of effective leaders all started to kind of look the same. That's why some people refer to this perspective as the great white man approach to leadership. So instead of focusing on individual traits, scholars turn their attention to leadership styles, arguing that it wasn't about the personal characteristics of the leader, but rather how they led, their leadership style. The Blake and Mouton Management Leadership Grid from Chapter 3 is a good example of this approach. But focusing on leadership styles still assume that there is a particular kind of leader that will be effective across all situations. And we know that just isn't true. Some people are effective leaders in one situation, but not effective in other situations. Winston Churchill is known as a great leader during World War II, but he was a fairly ineffective prime minister in the post-war years. So scholars began focusing their attention on contingency theories of leadership, arguing that effective leadership was contingent, or it depended upon a variety of situational factors. Sometimes this is called situational leadership. So good leadership isn't about having particular traits or styles, but rather being good at reading a particular situation and responding appropriately. And this is where a lot of leadership thinking is at today. A final approach to leadership that is also quite popular today is transformational leadership. Scholars recognize that certain leaders have a charismatic, visionary quality about them, that they seem able to transform their followers, not just get them to comply with rules. These are often larger-than-life figures, people who have almost a cult-like following. It doesn't mean they're transformational for everyone. Some people might be mesmerized by leaders like Steve Jobs or President Reagan or President Clinton. Other people might despise these leaders or simply not care. And transformational leadership really isn't something that you can simply train for or develop through a 10-step program. You sort of either have it or you don't, based on your life experiences, your personality, etc. But it is a real part of the leadership landscape that we need to understand and consider. Finally, communication scholars have made the biggest contribution to leadership studies in the area of framing. Framing focuses specifically on the content of leadership communication, what leaders actually say in various situations, and perhaps even more importantly, how they say it. In organizations, leaders often have more official communication than other people, so what they say and how they say it is very important, often making the difference between successful and unsuccessful organizational initiatives. In some ways, leadership really is just a language game, and framing is a way of managing meaning in which some aspect of an issue is selected or highlighted over other aspects. Just like in photography, where framing a picture in your viewfinder means emphasizing some things while simultaneously omitting others. And this isn't just semantics. Framing is very important. It really mattered that the events of 9/11 were framed as an act of war, not just a criminal act. And it really matters whether or not certain policies are framed in terms of national security or the war on terror. These terms enable certain responses and actions and restrict others. It really matters whether marriage laws, for example, are framed in terms of civil rights or religious liberty. Whatever the case, effective leaders are great communicators who use language to frame the situation to influence how people make sense and respond. And as we've been doing for all these processes of organizational communication, make sure you review this chart to see how the various approaches to organizational communication consider change and leadership. Plus, the discussion questions offer lots of good things to chat about on our discussion board this week. Next up in Chapter 11, we'll look at processes of emotion in the workplace.